right, I'm back with another marathon video. This is a big one. I wrote a 1,600 word article about this earlier, but I know some people would prefer to watch a video instead of listening to, or instead of reading that. So here we are. This is about something I've been thinking about for a very long time. It's always been in the back of my mind, but I've always tried to rationalize it. Then this week, I think it's done. I think it's cemented. I do not think marathon has a chance to be successful. And it's not, from my mind, it's not really if it's going to fail, but when it's going to fail. And I think there are just so many reasons for this that I had to write a whole outline, which I never do because I don't really want to forget anything. And this gives me no pleasure to say this and do this. Everyone's like, oh, you get clicks because of negativity, blah, blah, blah. You know what I get clicks from? Bungie games that survive a really long time. So I always have something to write about, as evidenced by Destiny. So I also have friends working on it. I maybe am being overly brutal here, but this is what I think. And I was always trying to rationalize, like, maybe, they could change this and do this and it'll be okay, but I don't think it's going to be okay. I think this starts with pretty much the entire concept of the game. I think this was a bad idea from the start, that they wanted to make a more casual focused, wider targeted extraction shooter. I do not know what everyone's current obsession with extraction shooters are, moving on from battle royales and things like that, because it seems pretty obvious to me that, at least in this instance, trying to make it more casual has sort of not worked on any specific group of people outside of a pretty small niche. This is not really appealing to a large number of casual players because this is not really a concept of a game that is designed for casual players. It is a game where you will lose your loot, and you will permanently lose your loot. You can take out more loot from your vault and you will lose that loot. And if you do, you have to buy really crappy loot from a vendor and try and compete that way. So if you are already a casual player that, might be used to other games, even like hero shooters or whatever, or, Destiny PvP or something like that, where you have like a set loadout or gear you cultivate, here you are never going to have a more casual version of just losing your loot. And for some people, that is part of the fun. It puts high stakes on things, but I think that is why it is not necessarily something that can appeal to a widespread collection of new players. And I know what you're about to say is that, well, this is, a lot of people do play this genre. But the problem there is Marathon does not appeal to almost all of those people. If you have a bunch of Tarkov people, and Tarkov is like super popular, and Bungie would love to peel off people from that, I have not heard any very avid Tarkov players have much positive to say about Marathon. They think it's too casual. They are complaining about, time to kill, how you loot, how fast you can loot, the fact that you can like double revive people from being down or in their duffel bags, and generally speaking, it's just not really remotely hardcore enough for that group. So where this is aimed, I'm not even sure. It seems like a very, very small sliver of a group that, I certainly see people say it was fun. I'm not saying I saw 0 people that thought it was fun, but it is not a large group from what I've seen. So conceptually from the start, I don't think a casual, not looter shooter, I'm so used to saying that, casual extraction game is going to work it. So that leads to the next point, where just past conceptually, now we have seen, and some of us have played, what this actually looks like. And I'm personally not very impressed, but I'm trying not to make this like just about me and my thoughts and like, oh, he doesn't like extraction shooters. I'm trying to kind of gauge what I see as wider trends here. And the gunplay might be pretty good. This is Bungie. This is the studio, with at least a different version of people back then that made Halo. And then they made Destiny. I still believe Destiny is one of the best feeling shooters that exists. And now they've made Marathon, where shooting feels fine, but it does not feel particularly revolutionary or something be like, you got to experience this. I just don't think that too many people were impressed by this. And people are saying maybe it was a mistake to have the alpha stop being, NDA'd and stuff, so there wouldn't be this narrative that got out. But I either way, there would have been leaks, and I don't think that's like the main problem the game had, or like the fact that it was not finished. There's this group that says it's going to be just dramatically better by launch, and we are now 4 months away from launch. I think it was like a 6 months difference between the build and the alpha, and I refuse to believe that is possible in meaningful ways. I'll get back into that later, but another, conceptual thing here and what it looked like in practice is the idea of a hero shooter extraction game. This seems to be the thing that was going to differentiate Marathon from other shooters, outside of aesthetic and some different things. The idea here was that this isn't really something that happens in the genre, so we're going to do some heroes and see, how that changes gameplay. I think most would argue that it does not change things for the better. I've certainly played hero games before, Overwatch, Marvel Rivals, like there's, a good amount of games where that does work. But here, having these classes, what I found is like most people are just stacking what is the current best class. Very, very often that was Void. And these classes have abilities that just don't seem like they have any place in this genre. Like Void has full invisibility, which seems crazy, and he can run around invisible with a shotgun in a game where if you die once, you lose everything. There is Blackbird that has wall hacks with her ping, which is, again, it's kind of very contrary to the idea of stalking around in a extraction shooter. And like there are balance things that can be done here, but, balancing the stuff around an extraction shooter kind of just reminds you that like maybe there's a reason that this doesn't happen. And I do not think that landed too well with a lot of players. This is something you cannot change. We're talking about things that I think are long-term problems or why it will fail, because the core concept is always going to be a extraction shooter with heroes, and you can't get around that. You're not going to change it out of heroes unless you spend years and years trying to rework the whole thing. It will not have that much time. Especially now, we are way, way too close to launch to change anything of significance. And that leads to the next thing. That live stream, man. I mean, it was awful on so many levels. Obviously, it was deeply uncomfortable. I mean, Joe Cross looked just like he hadn't slept in 5 years. And like, I imagine he did not sleep. And then they went into like alpha feedback, and it was just nothing. I mean, pretty much it was like the most minor of things that they went through. They were focused on like a lot of balance changes and, like the time to kill between shield levels is, too high, and looting, we need to think about stack size, and like we think backpacks are too readily available, but they'll spawn with more slots. And like the craziest part was when Joe was asked, Joe Ziegler, what was the biggest issue with the alpha that they came out of it with, and what do they think they need to change about that? Then he went on to list like a bunch of issues that are not remotely the biggest issues, and they're kind of just more minor things that I said. And they're like, enemy AI and like map events, and like this is just tiny, tiny little stuff. And like, yes, it's important for a shooter to have balance and things. It's also important to get people to play that shooter in the first place. I think it's pretty obvious to me that the biggest issue with the alpha was solos, as in a lack of solos, a lack of it feeling good to play solo. This is not always true across games, but especially with the way Marathon worked, it's either like you play with a stacked team of your friends on comms and you will do very well, most likely, or you play in a group of 3 with randoms. Sometimes that can go okay. Almost no one will ever be on comms. There are contrary objectives to, playing. Someone has to go here, someone has to go there for a bounty, and then you can't control just someone going off and dicking around somewhere, looting too long and getting picked off. And then you will probably almost certainly die in a 3v2 or 3v1 or whatever it ends up being. You can load in solo, and you'll be skulking around trying to get loot and avoiding everybody and everything. I did that sometimes. It was not the most fun. It got pretty old very quickly. And this is one issue like this and proximity chat and some of these other things that they just sort of like hand waved away. They're like, oh yeah, like we're thinking about that. That's a future plan. Like, sure. And it's like, these are some of the most like player requested player, problems that have been talked about. And it seems crazy that they're not even addressing it. On top of that, what they need to do is tell people things that will get them excited about the game. And if the current stuff isn't, it's time to pull the mask off. We are 4 months from this alleged launch. Talk about the new heroes, show those heroes off. Well, you can't, because you can't show the game because you're stripping it of all stolen art assets. And or talk about these new maps. Talk about when the new alien race is coming, what they're like, as opposed to just being super secret about it. There's been people have been like leaking essentially that there's this fourth map with like raid-like mechanics, and like show that, talk about that. I get how in a normal situation you might want to keep that under wraps, but like, buddy, this is DEF CON 1 or DEF CON 5. I think it's DEF CON 1. It's the most severe one. And like, it's time to bust that out. And they're just not talking about anything. And I mean, internally things are in chaos. I wrote about this where they've supposedly scrapped their whole marketing plan. Like they have to go back from scratch there. They're going to do a new trailer. They were going to open up pre-orders, and then they're going to do a big open beta in August. All of that is in flux now. They got to redo the ad campaign. There's going to be other multiple play tests before launch, and like the how that's working is unclear. So that's in chaos there. And then so that live stream, if we're looking at problems at present and at launch, that gave me very, very little hope for the future, or the idea that Bungie and Ziegler understand a lot of the main problems with this game. Like, okay, we got a hero shooter, extraction shooter, but there are other issues that are big that maybe you could fix that they do not seem terribly interested in fixing anytime soon. Then, related to this is solos and the team thing, and you need people on your team to play and make it fun. This is going to be a game that costs $40, probably $40. I've heard that from a lot of people. A lot of these games cost $40. Let's say 30 to get people more interested in it. It's not just that you have to decide whether it's worth it to play that. You're going to have to convince 2 of your friends to play that, or to buy that, and then 2 of your friends to play that with you regularly. That is difficult, and that chops away a huge portion of, the player base. I would say it's generally, younger people, younger generations that have more time to do stuff like that, as opposed to people around my age, who are like the average age of gamers now. But those kids are playing Fortnite and Roblox, and you're not going to get them to come play Marathon. So just the design of how this game is supposed to be played and then sold is difficult there. Like, I think there's this long list of problems, and at the end you're like, well, you got to pay $40 to experience the game. And I get that other extraction games are not free to play and cost money, but this especially is going to be a problem for Marathon. Then we will get to the plagiarism. This is slitting the throat of the game. If all these things were, body blows, this is kind of the last thing. And what it's done is, to recap here, this is supposedly an ex-Bungie artist from years ago that took a bunch of art and designs from this artist named Anti-Real, who has like a very Marathon-ish portfolio. And then over the years, put those into the game development. And sure enough, there are, I don't know, a dozen at least similar ones in the game. We only had 2 maps, and like Anti-Real and their friends were going around trying to find them in those maps, and like who knows about the maps we haven't seen yet. And it's just so bad because, first of all, this is like the 4th or 5th time this has happened. Bungie has at least has third-party contractors stole a lot of fan art or designs. There was one that was like an actual Nerf item you could buy that was stolen, and they've had to go back and like apologize and like change things and whatever. This doesn't happen like super often in gaming, and if it does, it doesn't happen 5 times. So the process of finding this stuff like this is awful, and it's clearly not working. One kind of side issue here was that, you looked at this anti-real portfolio, it looks very marathonish, and then you have the revelation that Joe Cross and a bunch of members of the art team have been following this person for a long time. This created a narrative, which I will admit I participated in for a little bit, that like, this was even broader than that, and the style was, so similar to this that, Marathon doesn't have a unique style. They took it from this. It is true that there are many, many sources of inspiration. I do believe Cross when he says like, oh, we're inspired by these different forms of art. And like, you look at his work from 11 years ago, you can see how these people could be like Marathon heroes or something. But like, it doesn't matter really, because perception is reality. And if you just saw this gallery in a vacuum, like you could be like, oh, that kind of looks like Marathon. And but like the fact that this is combined with the actual thievery, like just full on, just one-to-one theft, that it also makes you cast an eye on that. So that narrative is everywhere. Like, maybe I shouldn't have participated myself, but you have to understand why it's a problem and why this whole thing happened in the first place. Like, I didn't invent this, and it's everywhere. Like, people outside of this whole community, everyone's doing reaction videos to it. And like Bungie's cooked, Marathon stole things. And, now we've had this meme where it's plagiarism will make me God, which was spammed in the chat. People are now referring to Marathon as art raiders instead of arc raiders, which is, I didn't even mention that, but arc raiders really dug a knife into the alpha there. That name is going to stick. Like, that is something you cannot really escape. And this is always going to be the game that stole art. And if you talk about its art style, how you like that, like the previous thing here was, okay, I don't really like Marathon, but that art style is really cool. Like, I'd really like to see more of that. I'd like to play in a world like that. Now it's just the plagiarism game. And even if it's one guy, if it's a dozen pieces of art or whatever, and even if the whole soul wasn't stolen from this one person, what still happened is this stuff was stolen. This stuff remained in like Bungie's art collection or whatever, all the way to the point where it made it into the literal final game in this alpha, where you could hunt around the maps and find it. And what was that process? How did they not catch that? And yes, the buck stops with Joe Cross. And so we can talk about Joe Cross's inspiration. This is on him in terms of, whatever his process is of trying to avoid this specifically happening, that failed. He didn't do a good enough job. Like, so he is culpable for that, certainly. So this is just destroyed community sentiment. Like, everyone was kind of like teetering on edge, like, oh, is this going to be okay? Like, the alpha was like, okay, but, I was hoping it'd be better. And some people were like, okay, well, maybe, I could try this, and it's pretty okay. I had some fun. Now it's just slammed with this, and the whole thing is tainted by this new thing to the point where you're not really going to avoid it. As I said, like, you will be the stolen art game from here, and people cannot not really bring up its cool aesthetic anymore without this coming up. So this is, on top of this, that one stream really just sort of like closed the coffin, because it implied to me that they just don't have any idea what the community wants and any real timeline as to when it's going to be implemented and like what they should be talking about now. And then they address the art thievery, and we don't know the resolution of that. They were asked if they like would hire Anti-Real, and I'm like, why would Anti-Real want to work there? But they should pay them a ton of money, obviously. And, it's going to be a lot of work, I imagine, to run every single asset through the game. But guess what? You should have done that a long time ago, and not when the game is coming out in 4 months. That is the next point. A delay. Everyone's like, well, the game should be delayed. I've said this, and, it seems insane that this would come out in 4 months. Like, no way. That doesn't make any sense. You would be sending it out to fully die if you did that, to the point where it would almost seem like a scam. Like, the idea is that maybe Sony must have this come out no matter what, or like Bungie executives needed to come out so they can like vest their stock at the right time and leave. If you say at this date, like, there is no earthly reason that makes sense. That said, I don't think a delay fixes this. I don't think it fixes much of anything. I think there is not really a way to claw back community sentiment at this point. Like, yeah, we'll get a little further away from the plagiarism thing, and I don't know. It's probably better if they just don't talk about the game for like 3 to 6 months and then come back and be like, we changed all this stuff. Like, cool. But again, you're not changing the core concept. I still think your audience is very limited. And it is hard for me to see, 3, 6 months, even a year, that is going to significantly change this. This game has been worked on in some form or another since like 2018, and then maybe in earnest for like 5 years. But then, Chris Barrett was out. They threw away his vision mostly. And then Joe came with the heroes and stuff. So this version has really only been here for 2-ish years. But like, what patience does Sony have at this point to throw how many millions into future development for this? Have Bungie just kind of limping along on Destiny Frontier stuff, which is probably not going to be as profitable or widely played. So it's like, would Sony even tolerate that? So one thing you can't do is you can't cancel the game. Too late for that. Like, you got to launch it. You cannot cancel this game at the last minute. This is Batgirl. You're not going to write it off for taxes. Like, I don't think there's any way. And you're not going to significantly change. People are like, well, they should change this and add PvE. And it's, I would love that. And Bungie employees would have loved that because that's what they told me behind the scenes. And they repeatedly suggested that. And it didn't happen. It's not going to happen. Like, that would take years more of development time to add some sort of significant PvE component here. Again, I don't even think they could rip heroes out of it at this point. It's all too ingrained. So all they can really do is maybe add more stuff, like, oh, we have 6 maps and 8 heroes at launch and like things like that. But I don't think that's enough to turn things around. People have been calling this Concord 2.0. I think people forget just how historic the failure of Concord is. It did not hit 700 concurrent Steam players. It was shut down in 2 weeks. That said, I don't expect this to be a success. As I've been saying, it might not get 700, but it is going to get way, way less than they're hoping for. I heard this needed to be in the top 5 of like NPD sales for the year if it's going to be a success or considered a success. Crazy. No way. There's no way. Another reason you're not going free to play, but like, that seems impossible to me. I don't even know what to say. So it will not be literally Concord, but it will still be bad. If it's not 700 players, maybe it's, I don't even want to predict, how many thousands, maybe tens of thousands at launch. But what we saw in the alpha is interest dropped off very quick, both in terms of viewer metrics and player metrics. The player count went down every single day in the alpha, as opposed to the Arc Raiders one, which went up every single day. We had a lot of initial Twitch viewership with, really, really big name streamers, shooter players checking it out. Even some saying it was pretty cool. But guess what? Within 48 hours, almost all of them stopped playing it. And within like 4 or 5 days, it went from like 150,000 viewers to like 1,000 to 3,000. So the interest was not there for this test. That said, I don't think Sony can afford to do something crazy, like totally shut down Bungie or shut this game off after 2 weeks. Like, that would be so embarrassing. Concord never really looked good, like from the start, but Marathon at least had some sort of wind in its sails initially. Everyone loved the initial trailer. It looked really awesome. This is Bungie making a shooter. Like, hell yeah, it's going to be great. But now that it's here, it's too embarrassing for Sony to shut down Bungie or can the game immediately. So I could do a whole video on the results of this, but it's very bad for Bungie. It's very bad for Destiny. There would almost certainly be layoffs. Sony will probably fully take over leadership, which may be a good thing. And it will, I imagine it would be a shell of what it was, because if Marathon flops, like, Bungie is not in a good place. And even though, I don't think they'll shut down Bungie. I feel like it will be Bungie almost in name only. And in terms of shutting the game off, I think they will give it some amount of time. Marvel's Avengers got almost 2 years. Like, and we know what happened to that. Suicide Squad made content for a year. I would imagine this gets probably a year. That probably should, just to see what they can do. So no, it won't be Concord in that way. And if it did, that's like the most embarrassing thing that could happen to Sony. I don't like saying all this. I don't like being this harsh. As people have pointed out, I do have friends in the company. I do have friends working on the game. And someone asked me if I like burn bridges by doing this. And like, well, my sources are not too keen on what's happening either. And many of them share a lot of these thoughts. I'm just trying to present what I think is the reality of the situation. Did I personally enjoy playing Marathon? I don't know. Not really. I played for 20 hours. Probably not going to get me into extraction shooters. I played Ark, and I thought it was, good. It was better, but I'm probably still not going to get into extraction shooters. But that's just me. And I've very obviously been tracking the metrics of everybody, target audience, alpha players, and now the wider gaming community that is sort of run with this controversy. And, it's become kind of a laughingstock. And it's impossible for me not to read the writing on the wall. And I mean, who knows? Maybe I will be totally wrong. Maybe this will do a Fallout 76 and a No Man's Sky. The difference here is that it's how much does Sony want to dump into this still. And I don't think Sony has the patience of a Bethesda who has other stuff going on, who's going to make other Fallout games, or Hello Games, which is only working on, No Man's Sky all this time. It's a different situation. So doing some sort of grand comeback or whatever, I would worry about that being able to happen. And we see when that happens, we have your Anthems, we have your Suicide Squads, different genres, but that's sort of what happened. They tried to make it work, didn't work. So no, not 2 weeks, not Concord, but not good. That's what I got to say for now. I said this in my article, like, I'm going to keep covering it. If good things happen to Marathon, I will write about good things. If bad things happen about Marathon, I will write about those bad things. There are much more bad things than there are good things at the moment. So if I'm being negative, that's why. We'll see what happens next. I imagine they're going to go dark for some period of time. It's clear now they shouldn't have done that stream. Like, even if it felt like, oh, you're being cowards, they shouldn't have done that stream. They should have issued a really long statement about the art theft and like what they're going to do. But that was one of the most uncomfortable streams I've ever seen in my life. So not great. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. This article I wrote is getting viral online, to say the least, with everyone dumping their takes in, and almost everyone sort of agreeing with it. And if you guys don't, feel free to let me know. That's fine. Everyone can have their opinions. I've just finally kind of reached the top of the hill where it's like, I don't see it. I can't see it happening. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.